Hey everyone, so what does it mean when a judge actually throws out the eviction moratorium ban? And more importantly, how does it affect you as an investor? Now, recently, a federal judge overturned the eviction moratorium and he ruled that the CDC's national moratorium actually exceeds the agency's authority. Now, one thing you gotta understand is this decision is certainly a victory for us landlords because many of us are saying that we can't afford to continue housing people for free, and this ruling could potentially affect millions of struggling Americans. A recent survey showed that 18% of renters are not able to keep up with their rent payments. Folks, that's about 10 million Americans. Now, the Justice Department does say that it plans to appeal and it's gonna seek a stay, which would actually keep the ban in effect throughout the court battle. One thing you want to remember though is that this does not affect people in the 17 states that actually have their own eviction moratorium. But what are some factors that you as a landlord need to be aware of? Well, first of all, the eviction moratorium has 30 to 40 million people on hold that are on the chopping block to be evicted. That is with or without the moratorium ending. Next thing you got to understand is rent control is a law that dictates how much you can and cannot charge for rent when you're trying to rent your property. Also, how much you can increase the rent in the future. FYI, rent control is not in place to help you as the landlord with your cash flow numbers. Currently, the following places have rent control in place. You've got Oregon, California, New York, District of Columbia, Maryland, and New Jersey. Now, recently, California and Oregon have implemented their own statewide rent control laws. So one of the things you want to think about is, do you live in a tenant-friendly state or do you live in a landlord-friendly state? Because obviously they're going to affect you differently. Now here's some facts and figures that I want to show you. Now remember, these numbers and data are not here to either deter you or excite you. It's really just data and the facts and figures on how you interpret them based on what you are wanting to do in real estate. Now, rent collection recently has decreased over 15% in 2021. It was at 95% and it's now at 79%. If conditions don't change, they're saying that 29 to 43% of rental households are at risk of eviction. Now, mom and pop landlords, which own 22 million out of the 48 million rental units in the housing market, are saying that more than half of them, 58%, they don't have access to any lines of credit that will help them in the event of an emergency. Something else to think about is that 46% of all new home buyers are coming from rentals. That's really because of the low interest rates. So my question to you is, who fills that gap? Now, I personally know people that own multifamily properties. Last year, they had an occupancy rate of 98%. Right now, they're sitting at 73% occupancy. See, what you gotta understand is that is not sustainable for the long term. Just because someone is occupying a property, if they're not paying, it doesn't count as rent as far as I'm concerned. Right now, there are 225,000 to 500,000 homeowners across the country that might be facing foreclosure. That is double last year's numbers. So always remember that you're running a business, and when you're running a business, you have a client, and that client is your tenant. And that tenant is afforded rights by the local, state, and federal government. And when you enter a contract with them, you have to abide by the rules and laws of the contract. If they don't do their part of the agreed upon rules and contract, then you have to enforce your side legally. As tough as it can be, never let an emotional knee-jerk reaction get in the way of your business decision. I can't tell you how many times I've seen landlords get into arguments, screaming matches, and even fistfights with their tenants over rent that's not paid. I've actually seen landlords get restraining orders against them when their tenants say that they're being harassed by the landlord. Again, remember, you're running a business. This is part of the business that you're in. If you can't handle it, then either hire someone to run that side of the business for you, or maybe just get into a completely different business altogether. Real estate is a great tool for building wealth, but like anything else, it has its risks and things that you need to learn because there are specific things to this business model, and this is one of them. So look, while nobody has a crystal ball of understanding what is going to happen with the eviction moratorium, if it's going to be in effect for another month or maybe another year, you got to remember that you want to make sure that you have your business model set up in the future to be able to withstand things like this. Now, obviously, nobody thought there'd be a 1 year or 2 year long eviction moratorium. However, if you are buying properties and you are not buying them with the right reserves, these kinds of things will happen. Now, unfortunately, there will be a lot of people in the next 6 to 12 months that do lose their properties and they lose their business model because they did not set up their model correctly with enough reserves. So one thing you want to think about whenever you're buying a property is always think about conservatively, what if? What if the worst case happened? And that way you can plan for it and you can plan to set money aside. And again, don't just put it on paper. Actually take that money and set it aside in a different account so that you know you are prepared. Because again, this eviction moratorium, while it is unprecedented and nobody planned on it, it is here and we have to deal with it. And at some point, the banks are going to want their money. So you got to make sure that you're running a business, that client has to pay you their rent, which is the tenant, and you have to turn around and pay that money to the mortgage holder. Again, if you don't have the reserve set up, this is where you get yourself in trouble right from the very beginning. So I hope this helps. Please make sure that you subscribe to my channel. I'm Steve Rozenberg. Thank you very much.